Pastoral 21 is a collaborative venture between a number of dairy, red meat sector and government organisations and managed by Ag Research. The program has been set up in 4 areas around New Zealand to address issues relevant to those regions. One of the projects is being run at Massey University's No. 4 dairy farm, looking at cow barn bedding preferences. The other is around the effects of duration-controlled grazing on a commercial farm scale, with 2 different dairy systems being compared. Professor Mike Headley explains.
This is a year-round facility. We're trying to maximise the amount of pasture that we're growing. Our focus is to use the slurry that we collect to use at tactical times and reapply to the pasture to promote pasture growth. And by applying that dung and urine uniformly that the cow would normally drop in patches, we hope to get a 5 to 10% increase in growth from that nitrogen, and avoiding treading damage, perhaps another 5 to 10%. We have 200 cows in this shed, and they are paired up with another herd, exactly the same breeding worth and production worth statistics that are left at pasture, and so we're comparing the relative production of those 200 cow herds. This is our first season with the house really working. We're looking at spring growth rates at the moment. In the last week, they're about 10 kilos ahead on the house side compared with a standard pasture herd that we are comparing it to. We have 2 seasons to prove that this system both is profitable and will lower the footprint. We're pretty confident it'll lower the footprint because of the small plot concept trials that we did earlier. So at the moment, we've just got the first indications that we think it's going well. The payout doesn't help us this year with a facility like this. I mean, a lot of people that'll be watching this will think that we've built a shed to feed supplements through, but we've actually built a shed to try to maximise pasture production on these wet soils. So when we put that into the equation, if we can produce that 20% extra grass, then there's no financial penalty for building this house. Our cows in there are quite happy, and I think people need to see what cows have to face in the middle of winter in New Zealand on soils like these. They do get very muddy, cold and wet, and under those conditions, I tell you, if you leave the gates open, the cows will soon be in the shed. Initially, we looked at 3 bed systems: sand beds and rubber beds and foam covered with canvas. Lying is very important for milk production. So when they're held in here in the winter and it's wet outside and we're feeding them the maize silage and grass silage mix, are they spending enough time lying down and ruminating so that when we actually put them out to grass for the short time, they're eating grass, they're not lying down and resting outside. We're dealing with the slurry end here, and here's the opportunity to capture your nutrients in the pond, and we're using a slurry tanker to put them back on 80% of the farm. In the shed, we have automatic scrapers that scrape the slurry from the alleyways to a metal grate. It drops through the grate into the slurry channel here and then is gravity fed into the pond, so we don't have to pump.
Duration-controlled grazing is quite simply a term for controlling the duration that cows are grazing in situ on pasture. So in this study we used a 4-hour window. That first 4-hour window is the crucial time to get their allocated intake of the pasture. And it's really important that they do that because we're still feeding pasture as the majority of their diet. In a duration-controlled system, they come out to pasture, and after a shortened amount of time they're taken off to rest and ruminate on the standoff facility. And so if that standoff facility is beside the milking shed, there's no more walking and very minimal extra labour in terms of getting them off. You've got to get them off, but it's just at a different time of day. The results we got was a 52% reduction in nitrate leaching on average over 3 years. But then we went a step further and looked at the critical times of year that duration-controlled grazing needed to be implemented to to get that nitrate leaching reduction effect. So in effect, basically from late summer through autumn, they're the critical times that you need to get the cows off, reducing those urine patches, and therefore there's less nitrate build-up in the soil for the subsequent winter drainage. So it's really from February to about May on these types of soils that we're trying to target for duration-controlled grazing. From June through sometimes October, November, in worst years, the effect of pugging from cows or treating damage is quite high because the soils get very wet. So we're using the barn system now to remove those cows when the treating damage risk is high. And so if the soils are wet, the cows are taken off pasture, but for a different reason than for the autumn duration control grazing. These pits are basically the drainage collection pits for the plots. So each plot has its own isolated drainage system, and so each plot is mole and pipe drained, and all the water is basically intercepted that falls on that plot, comes into these pipes, one pipe for each plot. We've got a tipping bucket system to monitor the volume of drainage, and then a sample goes into a collection container for concentrations of the nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus. We're further quantifying it economically and practically using the farm systems trial here at Massey, but there's farmers that are using duration controlled grazing in different ways all over the country already, whether they're in a nutrient cap zone or whether they're trying to reduce winter pugging damage. So they're using it already, and what we're really doing is just putting the numbers around it.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.